Last week we spoke about this concept of archetypes and really borrowing the language from the great psychologist, psychoanalyst Carl Jung, who gave us a really useful frame of reference in order to understand this very, very deep and profound concept. I just want to make a point that when we were talking about the patriarchs as archetypes, I'm not trying to say that the concept, the Jewish concept or the Kabbalistic concept is exactly identical to the Jungian concept. There are a lot of similarities, as we explored last week, but I don't think they're identical. But what I do think that the language of psychology gives us a really accessible way of understanding Kabbalah, specifically the parts of Kabbalah and Chassidut which relate to our inner psyche and our consciousness. Those very words that I just used, those are words that we wouldn't have had without psychology and psychoanalysis. So we have a lot of words and concepts in our tradition, but some of them are difficult to understand. And borrowing the language of psychology allows us to actually understand these concepts. So we explore the idea of archetypes as some kind of symbol which is embedded into the very depths of our psyche or our soul. And Jung had a way of actually discovering them. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how he discovered these archetypes. And we spoke about the patriarchs, namely Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as actual symbols. So aside from being people, being actual real people who lived in Israel and traversed the earth and did all these important things, they also almost transcend their literal characters, which in Hebrew is called pshat, the literal interpretation of the Bible, and they become symbols or concepts, which are almost like an inheritance in our collective identity as a Jewish people. And saying that, by understanding their nature, we can begin to connect to them and draw inspiration and draw courage and hope and strength from them, from their life experiences. And we spoke a little bit about this idea of Abraham representing chesed, kindness, loving kindness, unrestrained kindness, his son Yitzchak being the exact opposite, which is gevura, strength or might, ultimate judgment. And finally, the third generation of Yaakov, Jacob, being the synthesis between those two. So the right amount of judgment with the right amount of kindness, which in Hebrew is called tiferet, or means compassion or empathy. So by exercising this very human trait of empathy, we're able to connect to another person in order to give them the appropriate amounts of whatever we're trying to distribute, whether it's love or resources or whatever it is. So being able to have empathy allows us to transcend our tendency to give too much, to fulfill our own selfish need, or to be overcritical and over-judgmental, hence restraining when someone is deserving, and be able to connect to them and try and give appropriately, which we also said is part of the dynamics of any good relationship, is this way of negotiating the give and take, the taking and receiving, giving and receiving. But tonight we're actually going to, I guess in a way we're going to go a little bit deeper, and this is a topic which interests a lot of people and certainly interests myself a lot, and something we all experience, and that is dreaming. We spend a good chunk of our nights doing it, whether we remember it or not. There's even scientific evidence to suggest that animals dream or have something that resembles human dreaming. People report watching their pets at night, and you can notice your pet either, displaying fear or being happy or whatever, and this is during this REM sleep, the rapid eye movement, where the dreaming takes place. And people have documented this, and there is to suggest that animals are dreaming as well. In fact, studies have been done to see how long a human being can function without sleep. So this idea of sleep deprivation, it's a form of torture. How long can a person endure without going to sleep? And one of the theories of why a person can't survive too long without sleep is a person needs to process whatever's happening in their unconscious mind. And sleep allows you to do so. It rests your conscious mind, everything goes quiet, and this internal dialogue, this internal world starts to take place. So dreaming plays a very vital role in the human experience. Even the way we use the word dream is very interesting. If a person is seen as very flighty, a bit of someone who's a bit aloof, a character is a bit out of it, you call them a dreamer. Yet someone who has a dream is someone who's considered to be a visionary. Someone has a dream; he can see beyond what's directly in front of us. Someone has a dream; they have a vision; they can see something deeper, something more profound. And if you think of the most famous speech, "I have a dream," someone who can see beyond and say, "Hey, I'm looking at something bigger from a different perspective." It's a way to be able to.
It's actually interesting because you then don't think of them as an impractical dreamer.
That's exactly the point. So they're actually someone who contains something very vital, which is the ability to see things from a deeper perspective. So, dreams are very, very much essential to the human experience. In our own tradition, dreams play again a very crucial role in understanding the journey of the Jewish people. And in fact, in the Bible itself, there are many, many episodes of dreams which all have very profound meaning to the dreamers and the people around them. And we're going to explore some of those tonight. In fact, in the Bible, there are 10 accounts of dreams that occur. Now, interestingly enough, now is the time where we're reading the portion of Genesis. So every Shabbat, every Sabbath, we read a section of the Torah. So in a year, we'll cover the entire Torah, the entire Bible. In these months, we start to read Genesis all over again after we had the High Holy Days. As we move into the month of Kislev, which is coming up soon, when Chanukah is, we start to read about the most famous of dreams, which is the dreams of Jacob, and again the dreams of Joseph and Pharaoh. Now, according to the book Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of formation, each month has a sense. So sort of like like you have at the back of the newspaper, you have the horoscopes. So we have our own kind of version of the horoscopes. And each month has a particular sense in which is associated with it. The month of Kislev is the sense associated with sleep. Now, it doesn't work very well in the southern hemisphere, but in the northern hemisphere, we're approaching the winter solstice, so we're at the closest point to the longest nights. So the month in which we read about all the dreams. And the Bible is also considered to be historically correct. Those were when the dreamings were happening. So you have a very, very long night. Traditionally, if you had a long night, you'd have more sleep because we were more connected with the rhythms. We would go to sleep when it became dark and wake up when it was light.
It's only Kislev that is connected?
Kislev, the sense of Kislev is the, according to Sefer Yetzirah, is the sense of sleep, yeah. And it's connected with with dreaming, and also on a physical level, it's connected with the fact that it's a very long night and it's the darkest point of the year. And at the same time, you have the Kislev is when we have Chanukah, which is the whole idea of the light within the darkness. So it's just something interesting to put in our minds. So what are we going to focus on tonight? There's so much we could explore in terms of dreams, and it's a huge topic, and in Judaism it's a huge topic. So we're going to have a bit of a synopsis of a few different things tonight. First, we're going to look at some, more contemporary perspectives. So we're going to look at the Freudian perspective and the Jungian perspective, just to touch a little bit upon it, again, to get a bit of a framework. Then we're going to look at the Talmud, some episodes of Dream, how the Talmud looks at it. Then we're going to look at some other secondary sources, some interesting sources which crop up from some 15th century writings. And then we're going to look at the biblical perspectives and finish off with a bit of Kabbalistic perspective. So it's going to be a bit of a journey. I hope we get a chance to cover most of it. And again, this is a conversation, and I'm sure, people have some interesting things to say if people want to share as it comes up. And if anyone wants to share some dreams that they've had, then we can see if we can interpret them as well here as a group. Not your dreams? You'd be surprised. Maybe they mean something good, yeah?
Somebody.
Yeah, no one will be forced to say anything they don't want to say. No, absolutely not. Okay, so let's look from a Freudian perspective. Freud, he was onto something, but he has a lot of detractors. I was speaking to Rabbi Label Wolf about Freud a while back, and he said, you can dig in the ground and find dirt, or you can dig in the ground and find gold. So he was digging in the ground into the psyche, and he found dirt. Now, there is dirt in the ground, but you might be looking for gold. You can find other things. So Freud was definitely had a certain orientation towards reducing all of the human motivation experience basically to our sexual desires. And later on, he revised a little bit. So there's also a bit of so eros and theos are also a bit of aggression tendencies, but basically had a very, I'd say, quite a sad view of humanity. Nonetheless, he had some interesting things to say. So from his perspective, the dreams reveal our unconscious desires. So you have several things going on in your inner world during the day. So you have your sense of self that you're bringing, your ego. And then you have your superego, which is how the pressures of society to conform to society and how they overlay onto your ego, onto your experience. But really what's cooking underneath, bubbling underneath the surface, is something called the id. And that is all our horrible tendencies and desires. So during our waking hours, the feelings and the sensations of this id are too difficult or not socially acceptable to express. Therefore, they get repressed through a variety of different ways. When we sleep, all of a sudden they all start coming to us. And when he would unpack people's dreams, he would look for symbols in which to figure out what a person's unconscious desires are. So he talks about two things. I'm just on this first page here. I've kind of got running notes here. The first page is the one with the title, The Shadow Self. So he had two basic things here. So one he called the manifest content. So that's what, upon awakening, you would recall. So basically, studies say that within 5 minutes of waking up, you forget 50% of what you've dreamed, and after a few more minutes, it basically all just evaporates. You can't really hold on to it. It's very, very hard. So if people want to actually start to understand their dreams, one suggestion is very practical. Have a notepad next to your bed, and as soon as you wake up, you write it down. If you have a partner, like you're saying, they might not want to hear your dreams, and you might want to keep it in a private journal. But whatever it is, if you want to start understanding your inner world and whatever it is, you can actually write down your dreams straight away and then reflect on them later, or share them with a friend or therapist or, whoever else you want to go to. So the manifest content, that's what you'd recall when you wake up. So it's the stories, the episodes that strike out at you straight away. Then you have this idea of the latent content. So what your dream really means. So it's the hidden message behind those symbols. So the interesting thing is that even while you're dreaming, and even in a sense how your mind is able to express its true desires, still at that point we're still holding back, because your dream won't sort of show you something that you can't really handle, even knowledge about yourself. And that's why he felt it was so important to go and discuss it with a therapist or have analysis, because once you came to the hidden meaning of your dream, the issue that you were struggling with would dissolve. Okay, so he had these another three kind of components to his dream analysis. So one he called condensation. So as the name suggests, two or more latent thoughts that are condensed into one manifest dream or image. Okay, so a few different concepts which are pushed onto an image. Then you have this idea of displacement. So this is where desires or emotions are displaced from the intended person object onto a meaningless object in a manifest dream. So in other words, and I have an example later, but if you're thinking about, I don't know what it is, maybe your spouse or your father or your mother, whatever, but that's too difficult for you to really acknowledge you might displace that onto a tree or onto a horse or something that might represent your father or your mother or anyone else. And finally, the symbolism, where symbols are used to disguise similar sounding or looking concepts or objects. So Freud got a bit stuck on this idea of symbolism, and people are probably familiar with this. I don't want to sort of go into it too much, but he was looking for two basically sexual symbols. So anything which slightly resembled a male or female private parts, essentially, he said that's what it is, right? So that was his whole thing. And this is actually when Carl Jung kind of had enough of this and wanted to develop his own concept of symbolism. He liked the idea of symbolism, but he says too reductionist to think that this is it. And that's what led him to actually finding all these archetypes, finding the wise sage that we spoke about last week, and finding the anima and animus, the sacred sort of masculine and feminine energies. He said it's not all about basically what Freud wanted to reduce everything to. And I've just brought down just a basic example of this concept, and it's quite interesting. So one of Freud's patients was extremely resentful of his sister-in-law and used to refer to her as a dog. Okay? And he dreamed of strangling a small white dog. All right? So he didn't dream of strangling his sister-in-law. That would be a bit too difficult for him to acknowledge. So he dreamed of strangling a small white dog. So Freud interpreted this as representing his wish to kill his sister-in-law. So really, he really hated her that much, but that's not really socially acceptable to kill someone if you don't like them, especially if it's your sister-in-law. So it had to come out in a dream, and maybe he wouldn't acknowledge it. So here it says, if the patient would have dreamed of killing his sister-in-law, he would have felt guilty. And even your psyche is trying to protect itself. So there's something going on. There's a complex that you have, but even your unconscious is protecting itself from even the feelings of guilt. So the unconscious mind transformed her into a dog to protect him. So when he went and helped this person under analysis and discover the meaning, he could acknowledge his feelings of, whatever, hatred towards his sister-in-law, and deal with the complex and hopefully move on. Has anyone here seen the movie Inception? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's like an amazing, if you're interested in this dream stuff, it's an amazing way to kind of visualize all this stuff. Inception. Mm.
Is this a new thing?
It's probably a year old. A few years old, 2 years old. You need a good few hours, and then you'll probably need to watch it several times. So you need a good investment. Okay, so that's a Freudian perspective. All right, this is not. This is not the Jewish perspective, but it's interesting to think about. Then we have the Jungian perspective, and I think this is more. Really resonates with me. The whole Jungian perspective. I kind of become a little bit obsessed with his psychology. It's very, very deep stuff. And he had a much more positive and optimistic view. So from his perspective, dreams guide a person through personal growth and transformation. It's not about dealing with your complexes and dealing with your deep-rooted sort of sick desires, but really the dreams are there to guide you through a process of, he called this individuation, which is about becoming whole, becoming a real person. And your dreams are there to guide you of that. And there's different layers of stuff going on in your dreams, according to Jung. First, you have your personal unconscious, which is concepts which relate to your immediate experience. So it's a completely subjective experience. That's kind of the first layer of your unconscious. But then we have this idea of a collective unconscious, which is more objective, where you're sort of tapped into all the other minds of the universe, people existing. And again, this idea of archetypes. I don't want to focus too much on this, but a way of understanding this, I read a metaphor, is about, imagine a person comes across a TV for the first time. So you're looking at this TV, you're like, wow, this is amazing. There's these images on a screen. So first you might think it's like one of the sort of Willy Wonka type ideas where there's actually little people inside the screen doing stuff. But someone could show you the back and the plug and the tube and turn it on and off, and you realize, okay, somehow there's some kind of projection onto a screen. So then you might think that your television is unique in the fact that, someone's programmed all these shows into this particular TV set, and that's what you're watching. Your experience is completely unique. And if you introduce this person to the concept that really the TVs are receiving signals from in invisible radio waves from a central location, and is beaming out, you'd say this is impossible. This is a crazy concept. But then if you went and showed the person the news, and the news was happening live, and then you said, hey, let's go to the neighbour's house, and you saw the exact same show was on the neighbour's house, and across the street and across town and across the world, you could start to connect to this concept that, yeah, there's actually some kind of radio waves being beamed out and into the television sets. So that's kind of the way that Jung perceived this idea of the collective unconscious, that a mind is useful for processing information, but it's also useful for receiving the waves which sort of the worlds or the soul, the spirit is putting out there. Now, for a spiritually oriented group, the concept maybe is possible to understand, but you have to remember Jung was a scientist, he was a psychologist, and he wasn't a mystic or a guru, a spiritualist in a classical sense, but he was someone who actually discovered these using the scientific method. Yeah, what was you going to say?
Can you direct those waves in the sense of, like described in the movie Inception, for example, where it was a physical kind of interference, but can you actually direct your waves at a particular person?
I can't, but some people can. Others, yeah. There've been.
You hear about people being prayed for.
Yeah.
All over the world, sort of thing, like that didn't even know the person. By people who don't even know them, and without knowing that they're being prayed for, and somehow it affects them.
Look, there's been.
And that's kind of waves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's been a documented in some of the research I was doing. There's a documented case of around just before the Spanish Inquisition. There were entire Jewish communities having identical dreams at night, and really sort of eerie. And it was to do with tefillin and to do with the tefillin that men wear for prayer, and things like that. So there's certainly this kind of interesting phenomenon. I don't know the mechanism for it, if a person can control that or how that actually works. That I didn't sort of come across, but
it's telepathic in a sense.
Yeah. And it's a very again a very interesting way of looking at how we're interconnected, and again our unconscious, our mind, is not simply contained to our brain, but rather it's a capacity of a soul to sort of, to almost transcend our physical body.
I wonder if, pardon, but I was just thinking, the concept of a laser might in a way be an image, that you take the energy and you zero. I'm not saying I know it, other than the concept has occurred to me, and I thought of laser as a possible image.
But I'm not sure. Sort of, you're saying could an individual somehow cause someone's dream? Now, there's an interesting story in the Talmud. I don't bring it down here, but someone came before one of the I don't know if he was, I can't recall if he was a Roman or Greek emperor of the time. He said, "Okay, unless you tell me what I'm going to dream tonight, I'm going to cause some intentional harm on the Jewish community." So he told him that tonight you're going to dream a dream where you find yourself amongst a lot of rubble and rubbish, and you're going to be sweeping it up with a golden pail. And sure enough, this emperor that night dreamed a dream of him collecting the rubbish with a golden pail. And he calls in the great sage and says, "Wow, that was incredible. You're a prophet, you're a mystic, you're all this stuff." He says, "No, I'm not." He says, "Whatever you think about during the day, you'll dream about during the nighttime." So he said, "All I did is give you some kind of image that you're going to become fixated on, and you dreamt about it that night." So that's not what we're talking about here. That's more of a meaningless dream. But
it's kind of power of suggestion too.
Exactly, like you kind of hypnotize it.
Pretty much. So using this as a power to
influence the subconscious. So the third point that I wanted to make here is that Jung said again something very interesting, that past and future can be revealed through dreams. Now, to think that our past can become revealed through dreams is something that I think we can kind of fathom. We're kind of maybe reflecting on our childhood, or if you want to take it a little bit more spiritual, go a bit deeper, maybe you can reflect on a previous incarnation if you're really sort of tuned into that kind of stuff. But he also talked about that you can somehow predict your future, that some dreams are indicating about a future. And you know, if a man maybe is dreaming about some kind of heroic battle that's going to take place, so maybe he's propelling himself towards his destiny, which is some kind of experience that he's about to have. So dreams also can tell you what's bubbling in your consciousness and what's pushing you towards your next stage of development, of emotional development. And I think that's, again, like a very, very profound concept, that we can think that our dreams can push us towards our dreams, to realizing our dreams. Even that expression is interesting. You want to realize your dreams. So taking this almost very unrefined concept of wish fulfillment, which is a Freudian perspective, an unconscious desire, and think that a dream can actually force you to think about and process what you want to work towards, and can actually, in a sense, reveal your future if you decide to take that course of action.
Couldn't a deja vu be a dream that was unconscious, that you did not remember, and that's why it's a deja vu, because it's something that you projected in the future as to how you wanted to do something, and it actually eventuates.
And it comes and happens.
You recall it and you go, hey, I've been here before.
Absolutely. Even
there are also people who say that if you have a problem that you want your mind to solve, that you want to solve, if you go to sleep thinking about it, that your brain will somehow...
Yeah, let me sleep on it. We say it all the time, let me sleep on it.
Could you interpret it as a system of the consciousness and unconsciousness working together, and where your consciousness limitation applies, subconsciousness comes into help to finish the process? So could you look at it as a sort of one system, and the process of creation of your dream, of your desires, of your goals is not only developed through your consciousness in your active life, but also in your subconsciousness where you sleep. If you're really involved mentally and spiritually, sort of live it, if you internalize that idea, then it transcends not only consciousness but your subconsciousness as well.
Absolutely. And the truth is that he talks like the consciousness is, if you painted a diagram, consciousness is the tip of the iceberg. It's like it's nothing. You know, we can't process even the millions of details which our unconscious is taking in right now. Can't possibly be conscious of all of them. And that's why actually through hypnosis, when a person wants someone to, let's say, recall things or remember things, so one of the hypnotic inductions is to take a person back. Okay, what did it feel like? What did it smell like? Now visualize exactly where you were. And you can actually go into the unconscious. So right now, like maybe I didn't notice the colors or the way the light fell on particular people's faces, because it's not useful to my conscious mind right now. I'm trying to focus on this learning. But my unconscious is taking every single detail in, and it's going somewhere. Not a physical space, but some kind of space. So again, it's very interesting. And just a point about the deja vu, interesting thing that the Baal Shem Tov talks about this concept, an amazing concept. He says that, so every person has their tikkun, which is basically, tikkun means like a repair or a healing, the reason why you're here in this world, what you're doing here. And one of the goals of our life is to kind of figure out what our tikkun is. And he would actually help people find their tikkun and say, yes, you should go here or do that, meet this person, and some things would unfold. But one of the things we do is we kind of mess it up, so we kind of be in a situation and we're not able to, let's say, live to the task. So he says one of the ways of knowing that, let's say you've done teshuvah, you've sort of come the full circle, done some healing over a particular situation, is you'll find yourself in an identical situation where you were, but this time you kind of do it right, and I think that's happened to me a few times. Really, it's like, whoa, everything's set the scene, but it might be with a different person, a different place. Maybe you left someone stranded, but it's not just like a similar experience. Oh, cool, I was at 7-Eleven last week and now I'm here, Something really profound, like, whoa, so this is all sort of, and then you do it, and then it's like, it's cathartic, it's just an amazing thing.
Do it the right way.
Yeah, and you have, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is go, through that reflection, like saying, oh, okay, what was going on there? What stopped me at that moment? And then something will happen, we call it hashgacha pratis, divine providence, puts all those pieces back together for us to have another turn at it.
Form of karma.
Yeah, it's a kind of a Jewish kind of karma. Yeah, again, a lot of these concepts are interchangeable.
Wonderful.
But not
Is there an
in terms.
average of how many times you revisit that until you get it right?
Hopefully in our lifetime, as many as necessary. And if you miss out, you're going to have to come back again. As we said, you might as well try and work towards your tikkun, because it's just, who says next time it's going to be so easy, Okay. Now, we've gone through some of the contemporary sources. Let's go into our own tradition here. The Talmud. Yeah.
Did Jung have a view on the strangling the dog?
On the dog?
Yeah. What was Jung's view on interpreting that phrase?
I don't know what he would have said.
Probably
Yeah.
separated from Freud beforehand. Before.
So it doesn't count.
Look, I mean, see, the idea of a complex maybe, maybe he just I don't know, maybe he'd unpack it differently, like, maybe it wouldn't just end at, okay, you wanted to kill your sister because it's part of your, human tendency to be violent, but there's an aggression, but maybe he'd look at some kind of other transformative element to it. And this will come clear as we look at how the Talmud looks at dreams. Okay,
How does it make you feel?
Sorry?
How does it
make you feel? Yeah. There's one. Oh, no, actually, I don't think we have time to go through another interesting perspective. I will talk about it at the end. Okay. So, the Talmud. Talmud is an amazing set of literature for those who have a lot of time to learn, but it's pretty much got everything in it. So the Talmud is conflicted in its view of dreams. In other words, the Talmud is basically, if you had a tape recorder in the main yeshiva of the time, the yeshivas, the Jewish academies, and you could listen into the conversations and how they figured out what the Bible, what the Torah means, that's a Talmud. So there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of bantering, etc. It's a great experience for whoever wants to really get into Jewish learning. I mean, it's legal, it's legalistic, it's not necessarily like this, but it's an amazing thing. Anyway, there's a few different accounts. So the first account here, it says, dreams are of no effect one way or another. In other words, they're meaningless. Pay no credence to them. You dream, move on. Then we have another account here. Always seek to derive a good interpretation, even for a bad dream, for the fulfillment of dreams follows the interpretation. So here we put a very, very strong emphasis on the interpretation, on being able to interpret the meaning of the dream. So you get a good analyst that is saying that you have to actually follow the interpretation. So the way you understand your dream will really impact on whether the dream is true or is meaningful or not. So much so.
What happens if you don't interpret a dream? I mean, if you don't.
Or just keep coming back to
You
you.
don't remember it, or you don't think about it.
Well, you won't be whole. You'll be missing a good chunk of your
So you
understanding of
have to
yourself.
remember your dream.
Look, I mean, if you want to go down this journey, I think it's, could be really interesting
Moshe,
to do.
but could it be that you creating the experience for yourself based on that? Your interpretation affects the reality?
Yeah, sure.
And
I
you're
mean,
leading yourself, your life towards that experience? Yeah.
that's possible, but I will say that actually, on another point, I'm talking now, so that's more, let's say, from a psychological perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, I didn't bring a source here, but it says if you have a really bad dream, there's a way that you should go in front of 3 people, and you sort of nullify your dream. You say, I had a dream, and they're like, it's nullified. Now you set up like a little, it's called like a bet din, like a little court, which is usually 3 people, and you say, I want to nullify my dream, and there's a little kind of call and response, like a nusach of how to nullify a bad dream. And that's not just talking about psychologically, it's saying like getting rid of the bad omens, you can actually get rid of it.
You can see also, like, if you want for interpretation, you have to put someone who's good for you.
Yes.
Not someone who wants to push you back, because you put like directly somewhere.
Absolutely, we're going to get to that exact point, exactly. Okay, so then we say, Rabbana told that there were 24 interpreters of dreams in Jerusalem. This is in Talmudic period. Once I dreamt a dream, and I went around to all of them, and they all gave different interpretations, and all were fulfilled. Thus confirming that which is said, quoting the Gemara before, the Brachot, all dreams follow the interpretation of the mouth. So paying very, very, it's really important to have a good interpretation. Okay, now if we want to, the next paragraph is something very interesting. Now, this interpretation is not how Freud would have interpreted these dreams, but this is how the Talmud does interpret these dreams. If one dreams that he has intercourse with his mother, he may expect to obtain understanding, since it says, you will call understanding mother. Now remember in the previous Kabbalah class we talked about Ima as Bina, as the concept of understanding. So he's taking a more Kabbalistic interpretation on something which could have been quite a disturbing dream. We will continue. If one dreams he has intercourse with a betrothed maiden, he may expect to have attained knowledge of Torah, since it says, Moses commanded us a law, the Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. Read not morasha, which in Hebrew means inheritance, but me'orsa, from a betrothed one. So again, he's using like psukim, biblical verses, to actually provide a deeper explanation on something, again, that could seem quite perverse, but is actually a very, very positive thing.
So in Hebrew, those two words have the same consonants?
Yeah, they're similar words, yeah. So
They
similar
just have
concepts.
different vowels.
Yeah.
What's dream in Hebrew?
Sorry?
How do you say dream in Hebrew?
Chalon.
Chalon.
Chalon, yeah.
What's the shorish of that? Is it
I don't think there is a shorish, yeah. In a book that I read, it talked about the shape of the letters, how they relate to the actual concept of dreams. As the first letter chet, it's kind of like a doorway. It looks like a doorway, like looking to the spiritual realms. So, yeah. If one dreams he has had intercourse with his sister, he may expect to obtain wisdom, since it says, say to wisdom, you are my sister. Again, quoting a biblical verse. If one dreams he has intercourse with a married woman, he can be confident that he is destined for the future world, provided he does not know her and did not think of her in the evening. So it's a bit of a caveat there. Now, the point of this is saying, again, I don't know if someone mentioned here before, but like it depends on who the dreamer is. So if you're talking about like a Talmudic sage and he has his sort of what's going on here with his dream? This is not what I'm into. Well, there's another way of interpreting it, and it's important in this case to go to your local sage and not go to your local Freudian analyst if you're having these kind of dreams. Okay.
Can you turn them all around to a female? Because they're all men doing that.
Yeah,
That
there are.
female doing that.
It would. I think the interpretation would be the same or similar. Yeah. Although I don't have. Yeah. I haven't meditated on the concepts into greater depth.
So Moshe, how would you reconcile those conflicts and that different conflicting sort of views of the dreams appear
In the Talmud? Oh, look, it's the great thing that I love about Judaism. It says Yesh Shivim Panim. There's 70 faces. There's 70 ways of looking at the Torah. So that's fine. There can be conflicting opinions. And the beautiful thing is that he saw there were 24 dream interpreters in Jerusalem. Now, if you think about what was going on spiritually at the time of the Talmud, you're talking about amazing people, like people who could. There's stories in the Talmud about, these Amoraim, these Talmudic scholars bringing people back to life. Like if these people were dream interpreters, they knew what was going on. So he went to all 24 of them, and each one had a different explanation, but they all followed. So there's some seriously profound things going on. And the conflicts, the best part of it, it's the same, best part of Judaism, the conflicts, it doesn't matter. Here we're not talking about, the bottom line, halacha, when it comes down to the letter of the law. So even in a Gemara, there's this whole, it's called Shakla V'Tarya. They go backward and forward and argue and bring proofs and refutations and rebuttals. And then majority of times they come to a resolution. And so say, okay, this is the halacha, this is being decided. But this, in the realm of, of philosophy and understanding, the conflicts are celebrated.
No, I just thought.
But isn't it also? Oh, sorry.
The first example talks about the dreams itself, whereas all the other examples talk about the interpretation.
Yeah.
So maybe the dreams itself, if they're not interpreted,
Are
don't mean
meaningless.
anything.
Yeah.
Whereas if you put some sort of an interpretation to them, then they
They can
be
become
so
meaningful.
consequences.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So here we go into some later sources. There's some other interesting sources. There's a book called Sefer Hasidim, and really has a lot of interesting minhagim that we have, different customs, and it also has a bit of an account on dreams. Why is a man shown things in a dream? A man, but just a person. So why is a person shown things in a dream? The dream is like a man who comes anew. This could be a typo. He comes to a nation whose language he doesn't understand. It's a beautiful metaphor. So if those people should speak to him, he would not understand. Therefore, they show him through visions and likeness, like those who gesture before a deaf person who cannot hear. So they show a person a dream. Anyone who is understanding will know what is being shown to him and why it's relevant to him. So Sefer Hasidim, a mashal, yeah, it's a symbolic reference. So in other words, it's a great metaphor. Like, okay, so you come to a country and you have no way of understanding the culture or the language, you can't talk. So they have to, and anyone who's traveled and you meet someone and you could figure out how to talk and you point and you do all this stuff. it's really an awesome experience of trying to communicate in that way. And a dream is similar to your unconscious trying to talk to you, and you have to figure out what it's trying to say to you. Then there's this book, which is by a rabbi called Rab Almoy, and it's written from the 15th century. And this is a quote from his book and a few ideas from his book subsequent. Dreams do not come to one while awake, because the powers of the body are strong then, and they press down upon the soul. But they come during sleep, which is the time of the cessation of emotions and bodily powers. For sleep is a 60th portion of death. And the body does not press down upon the soul as it does while one is awake. So he's suggesting that, really the truth is, if I can put a different words in his mouth, your unconscious, there's too much going on, too many things going on. Your body, your physical identity is taking on too much emphasis, that the dreams can't come to you while you're awake. They wait till your body quietens down. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to eat. You don't need to work, and then the real stuff comes up. It's an idea. It's a quote basically. It says sleep is the 60th death, and it's to do, from a halachic perspective. It's from a Jewish legal perspective. Again, it's to do with this idea of tuma, of a spirit of impurity which rests upon the body when you sleep. That's the reason, by the way, why we wash our hands in the morning. We do netilat yadayim. It's a custom to wash your hands in the morning. People who are very diligent about this actually prepare a cup of water next to their bed, so immediately upon arising they'll wash the spirit of impurity from their hands. But look, I guess it's a bit of an out-of-body experience, and your soul is actually leaving your body during sleep. So there's a bit of impurity going on there. So he lays down a few actual principles. I thought it was really interesting, so I wanted to bring them down. He says two kinds of dream interpreters. There's the chacham. Chacham means a wise person. So it's really like an academic, someone who's very, very intelligent, a sage. And then there's a navan, from the word navi, someone who's prophetic, and more of a mystical interpretation. So you can have a person who's looking at it from more, okay, I have a lot of knowledge, I have a lot of wisdom, I have a lot of understanding. What we would probably call from a psychological perspective. And then you have more of a spiritual, mystical type interpretation, to which people, for example, there's a book, we have it in our library, where the book's called The Sense of the Supernatural, where people write to this rabbi, talk about him a lot, Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg from Israel, who's a Kabbalist, and they write to him about their dreams, and he gives a very mystical interpretation of their dreams and what's going on for them. So 2 kinds of ways of interpreting dreams. He also gives 3 categories of dreams. The first is prophetic dreams, so when you're actually having an encounter, spiritual experience. The second is an ordinary dream, so the majority of dreams that we have. And the third category is he gives a magical dream of a false prophet. In other words, where people are connecting to what we call klippa, the dark side, and trying to divine things through their dreams and have mystical experiences that they're not really worthy of. And it's sort of like the dark forces type of dreams.
Well, what's a spiritual dream?
For example, my mother she's been known to have some really interesting dreams, and they've been prophetic. She's had dreams that have come true. She dreamed once, one of my siblings, she dreamed that it was a Thursday morning and she was holding this baby boy with black hair and blue eyes, and she was holding my sister's baby, and then a week later on the Thursday that all happened.
My mother also had.
And she's had other dreams. Not going to share them all tonight, but that I would say is bordering on a prophetic dream. Now,
Bordering on a what?
like a prophecy,
Okay,
a kind of prophecy. Yeah, and I believe
so
it's possible. She's got a little something there.
Psychic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people have these kind of dreams, or they dream that their father comes to them and talks to them, and it's not like a symbolic dream, like, this guy looked like my father. But actually, if I say, hey, you need to do something, and then they go and do it, and stuff like that. There's been a lot of stories about that, across different cultures. That's what we call a prophetic dream. And then the ordinary dream is more like the symbolic dreams we've been talking about. So here he actually gives 4 constraints in dream interpretation for those of us who want to become expert dream interpreters. So the first constraint is they contain strange and exotic elements with many symbols. So you have to really be able to recognize the symbols, and obscure images, very, very strange things that we might not come in contact with in our day-to-day life. The second one, and this is what Avi was referring to, that people who both understand symbols and the dreamer are rare. So you need to have an intimate knowledge of the person, the subject, and you also have to have an intimate knowledge of dream interpretation. And that's not often the case, that you might have that connection with a person to be able to have both skills.
Can I ask much on that point? Should, like, people who, couples, should they avoid? Because you might know someone so well, but you might, there might be that level of intimacy that's too much, maybe. Because you might read in jealousy, you might read in other things that are not.
You could be projecting onto their dreams, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's complicated.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the exact opposite of this happens actually in Freudian therapy, where the therapist would sit behind the couch and there would be like a blank slate, and the whole idea was that the therapist wouldn't assume any personality, and that the client would be, or he would call them the patient, would be projecting images. So trying to project their father or project all these different images onto the therapist, which is the opposite of this sort of intimacy and trust that we're talking about. So, it would be probably would be very. I'm not going to answer that. Yeah. Probably would depend on the relationship. Yeah. You'd have to know. Yeah, you'd have to know what's going on. Okay, so the third one is that many meaningless things occur and appear in a dream. So how do you know what's a symbol which is important, which is useful, and one that's just a random, just happened to be a tree there because it's your mind's painting an image, a beautiful image of a forest or whatever. And finally, 4, there can be dreams without any significant meaning altogether. So you could spend 10 years in therapy maybe and a good few, several $1,000s, but the dreams that you're having are just little nice, cute little fantasies that really don't have much importance to you. So you have to be quite skilled and quite knowledgeable in order to really have a successful dream interpretation. This is according to Rab Almoy. Then he gives 3 sort of fundamental principles here. One is about recurring dreams. So often, I don't know, have people had this kind of thing, recurring dreams? Yeah, it's really, really amazing thing. As a kid, I used to have this recurring nightmare. I'll probably have it tonight now. Actually, now I've done it. Maybe I've resolved it. I don't know. I had this recurring nightmare. It would sort of come at these specific times. It was very scary. It's very frightening. And a recurring dream is a powerful thing. So for him, a recurring dream is a sign that it needs some interpretation.
I was very. I've seen the movie Titanic when I was very young. Too young when it came. I was obsessed with this.
Yeah. The imagery and stuff,
and we also lived overseas, and we had to go with a ship to Israel, and I remember I was always taken, and the dreams came all the time.
About the Titanic,
yeah. And me and them.
Usually it has something to do with unfinished business.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So someone mentioned this, sorry, what was your name?
That's right, I'm Audrey.
Audrey, so talked about this concept of unfinished business. So your mind's telling you, hey, you need to work through something. So he said that if you're having the identical dream, then you can just interpret the one dream independently. But if you had several dreams with changing details, so you should view them as a sequence. So it's almost like some kind of pattern that you have to unlock. That was one principle he wanted to lay down. The second one is that the interpretation must, it says be related, but it means it's a typo, must relate to matters close to the dreamer. In other words, his body, his soul, his family, elements of his or her imagination. If the interpretation is too far out, like too way out there, and the person can't link it back to their experience, you're probably off in your interpretation. And the third one is, again, this point that Avi mentioned, the interpreter must have an intimate knowledge of the dreamer's life. And he gives an example. If a person sees a river, they have a dream about a river, they're preparing to cross it with great difficulty, and because of the strength of the horse, of a horse, is a really strong stallion, he's able to cross the river. So depending on the person and what he's into and his particular occupation, etc., will determine whether or not what this means, what this symbol is. And it's a pretty basic concept, but still, he gives an example. For an academic, So the meaning there might be that he's going to transcend profound or impossible issues, that a person's going to be able to solve some very difficult problems, intellectual problems. If the person is a laborer, someone who's a hard worker, the horse might represent his desire to have like strong, strength, physical strength and might. So the same dream, without an intimate knowledge of who the person is, you might not be able to have a successful interpretation. Now, I'm aware of the time constraints, so I'm wondering what we should do for the last few minutes here. All right, we'll briefly look at Jacob's dream. Does everyone have this? Yeah? Okay. So, Jacob's dream is very, again, like a really amazing account of a dream, and we could probably spend a lot of time focusing on Jacob's dream specifically. But the short and long of it is, Jacob spent 14 years without sleeping. He was in a yeshiva, the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, and he was learning the whole time, and he didn't sleep the entire time. And then he left Beersheba and he went to a place called Haran, and he arrived at a place and he slept there, and he took some stones, and I'm just reading the Chumash here, but he took some stones, he put them around his head, he took 12 stones, and then he went to sleep. It says that was the first time he slept in 14 years, so he obviously had a very, very deep sleep. And again, from this psychological perspective, we could say that he really needed to go into the depth of his unconscious to resolve some things. He needed a really good night's sleep. He hadn't gone to that part of himself for that amount of time. So, and now up to the pasuk, to verse 12 here. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set upon the ground, and its top reached to heaven. And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. Very, very powerful image. In Hebrew, it's even sort of better. It's sulam mutzav arza, that the ladder was firmed into the ground. Varosha, and its head, the head of the ladder, magia hashamayim, reached the heavens. This image of a ladder is one of the, when we start to go into Kabbalistic ideas, is one of the ways that we look at dreams as a ladder, a bridge between the physical and spiritual realms. And it's actually represented by this letter Aleph. The letter Aleph, and I've got it on the other page here. If you flip the page, the letter Aleph, if you look at it, it has a slant, and it has a little sort of nick on the top and a little nick on the bottom. And the idea is that the Aleph is that bridge represents a person's bridge between the upper and lower worlds. And again, the word for humanity, for mankind, is called Adam. The physical and the spiritual realms. And the word for humanity, mankind, is Adam, which is Aleph, starts with the letter Aleph, representing the idea of the spirituality, spiritual component of bridging physical and spiritual. And Dam, which is blood, we're just flesh and blood. So we're a combination of this spirit, this intense spirit, this capacity to be able to bridge opposites, and in the sense we're also mortal as well. So if we stick on the top of this page, this will just finish with a few ideas of what Jacob was trying to do with his bridging of opposites. So Jacob had his twin brother, who was almost like his nemesis, who was in every sense was the opposite of him. We talked about him a bit last week. His name was Esav, and he was, from the moment he was born, he was called Esav because he was asui, he was fully made, he was hairy, he was ready to go, and he was wild and vicious and would fight and would kill, etc. And Yaakov was he was a mensch, he was a good boy. He spent a lot of time with his mother and he learned Torah. He was a good boy. So Jacob and Esav were opposites. And indeed, Yaakov was fleeing from his brother Esav. In a way, he was running away from Esav. But if you take it a step deeper, he was also, they would say, there was some history there. Besides for his physical need, right, the most basic physical need of actually being safe from his brother, there's also some emotional history there. There was some tension, some conflict going on between him and Esav as brothers, as rivals. And there was that episode with the birthright where Jacob ended up taking the birthright, or buying the birthright off his brother. On a deeper level, there's also this idea, the tension between Yaakov as a Jewish people and Esav, represented by Edom as Rome, the conflict that needs resolution between the Jewish people and the rest of the world, and how we find our place in the world amidst persecution, etc., and how to actually resolve that on a bit of a deeper level. And indeed, Yaakov was trying to find himself. He was also he was on a journey to find his wife, and that's where he was heading. So a lot of different internal things going on between himself and the other elements, other forces that were going on.
And maybe Jacob didn't sort everything out properly, and that's why we've got so much conflict now.
Well, towards the end of this story, he actually had, I guess we'll close on this, he had this very profound incident where he was crossing this river and he meets some kind of creature which he wrestled with the whole night. And towards the end of that wrestle, when this creature said, and the dawn was rising, this creature said, "Let me go, I need to go back to wherever I came from." He said, all right. He acquiesced and he realized that he had lost the battle, and he gave one final kick to Yaakov in his leg, and that's the gid hanoshe. That's a sinew, which we don't, as a symbolic thing, it's a mitzvah not to eat from that part of an animal. And just before he left, he says, now I'm going to change your name. I'm going to change your name to Yisrael. So Yaakov, the word Yaakov is a composite name. Yud, which represents that spark, the little point, spirituality, and Akev, which is the heel. And Yaakov was someone who struggled with trying to bridge those two worlds together. From the very moment he was born, he came out holding the heel of his brother, saying, I want to do so, I want to conquer you. And at that moment, he became Yisrael. And we're not named after the name Yaakov, we're Am Yisrael, we're called the nation of Israel. Maybe we should call Am Yaakov. But really, that was his really sort of epic moment where he could define himself, he had his family, he had his whole thing. He had to have this one final conflict where he was battling his inner demons, which actually physically manifest into this really epic battle. And going back to last week, this idea of the archetypes, that we have this kind of tension, this inner conflict, which we can resolve. And with God's help, we'll be able to transcend from the level of Yaakov to Yisrael. Just before we finish, I photocopied here a prayer at the bottom. And every night before we go to sleep, there's a tefillah, a prayer, which is called Kriya Shema al Hamita, which is the final Shema before you go to sleep. It's a very beautiful thing. People have memories of their mother, maybe, or their father, saying the Shema with their children before they go to sleep. But there's actually an extended prayer. But the final prayer is a blessing, actually, on sleep, to have a good night's sleep, because we look at it as it's a spiritual experience. The last thing we do before we go to sleep, we say this little prayer, and actually it's a custom. Once you say this, that's it. We don't talk anymore. Finished. We let go. So I included it here if people want to have a look at it, or maybe something that you'd want to incorporate. People who've been struggling with having difficult dreams or sleep, etc. It's a very beautiful thing to be able to say, whether in Hebrew or English. And if you read the bottom, the English is really, again, it's also a beautiful prayer. And it's about being able to rest easy and return your soul to your Maker, and hopefully coming back the next day feeling restored and refreshed. Yeah. This is the end and the beginning. So we spoke about Modani is upon arising. This is about dreaming. But yeah, like really, I say, if you go to sleep well, if you, what do I say, like there's this idea of waking up like a lion. If you go to sleep like a dog, you're not going to wake up like a lion. You have to go to sleep like a mensch. So one of the ways of going to sleep, the last thing you say is, hey, I really have some good intentions before you go to sleep, and maybe that will carry through and you have profound dreams that are helpful to us.
Moshe, could we quickly touch upon the Kabbalistic perspective? I'm interested to know what's happening to our soul from Kabbalistic perspective when we dream. Is it gets separated from the body?
Briefly speaking, yes. The idea is that, and maybe we'll talk about it after, but the idea is, your soul actually is said. That's why this 160 of death, your soul leaves the body and gets actually restored. So it goes up to the spiritual realms, and depending on. So
restored to the highest level, at the
level. That's going to depend on who you are, of how lofty of an experience your soul might have.
So do you get instructions there?
Sorry?
About, do you get new instructions?
You could. The Arizal, the great Kabbalist, the Arizal, I don't know if people heard of him from Tzfat, he said he used to have a nice shluf. He had a shluf Erev Shabbos. He always had a nice sleep Erev Shabbos. And then he had a sleep Saturday afternoon, maybe after his cholent. And his students sort of, one of them said, what's going on here? You're supposed to be the Arizal and you're sleeping. He said, one dream, one set of sleeping, if I spoke to you for 70 years, consecutive years of talking to describe to you what I experienced in my dream, it still wouldn't suffice to be able to explain to you what was revealed to me in one dream.
So we don't have any connection to the soul. I mean, we can't connect where it leaves the body, or do we can still dream?
No, yeah, your soul is the one that's dreaming. Yeah, I mean,
Get lost.
Yeah, not come back in exactly the same shape as it was. Like, is it
Navigation.
I don't know.
Maybe there's like an attachment.
So the people who are very lucky are the ones who die in their sleep. It's in our tradition is considered a very high level actually. People say one final Shema and go to sleep and never wake up. It's considered like a tzaddik. You're like really, it's very saintly. Yeah, sure.
Are you supposed to say Shema before you go to sleep, or this?
Yeah, first the Shema, and this is there's actually like in the Siddur there's like a few pages of, and there's a whole host of different prayers. I mean the basic thing is to say Shema, the first paragraph Shema. Actually, the Kabbalists say that if you're having trouble sleeping, you can maybe say Shema again. But this is at the end of that. There's this blessing of Hamapil, which is said, and then it's supposed to put you into a good stead. Yeah.
Moshe, so you've got the interpretation here next to each level of soul. So if you experience a dream which deals with a physical condition, then it's experienced through nefesh. Is it what it is? And if you reaction to daily events, that's the ruach, which takes part in the process.
Yeah, unfortunately we didn't have time to go through it all. But I'll suggest you the book to read. I just want to, maybe we'll have time for a nigun, That's because people are going to get edgy and then it won't... Okay, this nigun, we'll do a lullaby nigun. No, not really. We'll do a nigun and... oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to stretch. Are you okay? Okay. Sorry, that'll help the nigun go in. Do a nigun. Hopefully connect us having a good night's sleep tonight. Yidayadom, dayadom, dayadom. Oh, ya, 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 ya. Yidayadom, oh, ya, ya. Oh, ya, 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 ya. Oh, ya, ya, da, ya, da, ya, da. Oh, ya, ya, ya. Dina yada ya 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 ya. Dina yada ya 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 ya.